So thanks everybody for joining today. Super excited to have a really great group of panelists here. We are going to be talking a little bit about AI literacy. We have four great panelists from all different backgrounds. So we have Laura Allen, who's an assistant professor at the University of Minnesota, Stefania Druga, a PhD candidate at the University of Washington, Duri Long, who's assistant professor at Northwestern, and Tyron Young, who is a senior manager for research and development at Digital Promise. So super excited to hear from everybody. I'll just sort of frame the discussion a little bit before we get started and kind of let everyone know how it's going to work. This panel sort of came out of increasing need for thinking about how AI is implemented in education, and AI sort of as a ubiquitous concept all around us. A lot, this conference is themed empowering learners in the age of AI. So we also kind of need to think about how we're teaching AI as well, and how AI literate we are as researchers, teachers, and students. And so, a lot of the talks we've seen so far in the conference and the panels and so forth have really focused on the use of AI to improve learning. Like, so how can we build AI into technologies, to make it more adaptive for students and so forth, to improve collaboration. My dog needs to be part of the panel as well. But, I think one of the equally important questions to ask is what is our responsibility to sort of make, our students literate in AI as we, try to use it to improve learning. So on the one hand, this relates to how we teach students about AI and how, it's ubiquity in their everyday lives. But on the other, it really relates to kind of empowering them to understand how AI itself may be used to teach them and how their data is being used. So with that, I want to invite all the panelists. So everybody's going to have about 7 to 9 minutes, but pretty flexible, to kind of give their take on AI. We've left it super open, so I'm hoping to get some variety of perspectives here. And then we'll open it up for questions at the end. I will encourage everybody, all the attendees, to go ahead and type your questions in the, there's a Q&A section here. And it would be great if you typed your questions in as the speakers are talking, so we can go ahead and kind of start thinking about them before we sort of reach that Q&A part after everyone's done talking. So with that, we're just going to go in alphabetical order. So I'll hand it over to Laura to go ahead and speak first. And then we'll go Laura, Stefania, Duri, and then Tyron. So Laura, whenever you're ready.
All right. Let me just share my screen. Can you, oh no. My mouse has disappeared somewhere. Can y'all just see the panelist list? Yeah, probably.
We can see a black background.
There's just
or
a
now
lot of
we can see you.
Popped up, so there we go.
Oh yeah,
Can you?
We're good now.
All righty. So hi everyone. Thank you, Caitlin, for inviting me to be on this panel. So for those of you who don't know me, probably everyone, I am an assistant professor at University of Minnesota, and most of my research has been sort of at this weird intersection between AI literacy, where I both study literacy. So I've spent a lot of time studying text comprehension and text production, and how we can best support students in learning how to read and write. And then I've also worked on developing technologies that can provide adaptive strategy instruction and feedback for students. Where I haven't done as much work is actually on AI literacy itself. Hopefully my take on this is at least a little bit useful. So when I was thinking about AI literacy, I thought about, again, my background's in literacy. So I thought about, what we think about in terms of regular literacy, or, the traditional view of literacy. If you look up the definition of literacy online, you will find many of them, and they're quite different. But generally, right, when we think about literacy, we think about some sort of ability to read, write, speak, and listen. So using language in a way that allows us to communicate with others and to make sense of the world, right? And so when I was thinking about how we can apply that same sort of perspective and what we know from teaching students in that realm of literacy to this sort of new way of thinking about literacy. So when we think about literacy from a text perspective, we think about the fact that we have some sort of language that is generally, connected in some sort of way, right? So we have individual words that make up the text, and then they're combined, in special ways to make sentences, and then we can sort of connect those in broader ways to make some sort of document. And if we want students to really understand, sort of how to make meaning out of text, then they really need to be able to have knowledge at multiple different levels. So first, they need to understand those individual words, right? So all those different words and what they mean. They don't need to know every single one of them, but they generally need to know most of the words in a text they're reading. They need to know what they mean and what they might be associated with in the world. They also need to know the rules for how those words can be combined, right? So we have a lot of different, words, but there's a very finite set of rules that we sort of operate under in order to combine those words. So not every single word can sort of just be combined with itself, right? We need to know the ways in which they move together and interact with each other. And then once we have these sentences, right, we also need to be able to combine them with our knowledge of the world in order to make sense of that language, right? So sort of a hallmark property of language is that it's all symbolic. And so it doesn't really mean anything in the world without us interacting with those symbols in the world, right? So there's no reason that the word chair means chair, it just does. And we sort of associate it with certain things through our interactions with the world in order to make sense of that. So if we try to think about those sort of same principles when we're thinking about AI literacy, I think at least we can draw some insights from that. So it similarly is going to require us to sort of break down what this form of literacy means into multiple different components, right? And this mapping is not perfect, so bear with me. But generally, we need to be able to first think about something like the words, right, in the analogy that I'm giving. So we need to know what the terminologies are. What are the concepts, right? What are the things that are representing whatever we're using? So they need to know what types of data is available to them, and how they can sort of use that data. What are the different ways that data can be stored or could be modeled? They need to know how that data can then be used in some sort of model in order to do something functional, right? So what are the ways in which I can take data from language, data from, clickstream data from facial recognition, and sort of combine those in different sorts of ways to develop some sort of model. And then finally, students need to not only understand all of those different sorts of pieces, which I think is a big focus, right, in digital literacy and AI literacy, and they need to know those things, but they also need to know how to interpret those things within the context of their own lived experiences and their own beliefs and their own knowledge, right? And I think this piece is really, really critical, and I think something that is really important that doesn't get missed. So similar to research and literacy, for a long time, people sort of focused on students knowing vocabulary and knowing grammatical rules. And probably you were a kid in school at some point and you were taught a lot of vocabulary and a lot of grammar rules. And we do that often while sacrificing teaching students how to construct meaning, right? And how to interpret things through their own lens and through their own knowledge. And I think that we need to sort of foster that in a similar way within AI literacy. So just to wrap up, I think that sort of the big ways that we should support students to become more literate is both teaching them the meaning of those different sort of component pieces. So where the data is, what types of data they have, where it's getting collected, what type of models there are, and what are the rules for how they work. And then also how to integrate that with their own understanding. And so, this is coming out weird, sorry. And so when we think about language, we think about the fact that I am a user of language and I'm producing language right now, right? But critical to the success of me producing language is that you understand what I'm saying and that we have some sort of shared understanding, right? So if my goal is misaligned or you don't interpret my goal in the same way, then I have failed as a speaker, right? And so I think we should think about literacy from this interactive way between students and AI systems so that they both are aware of how they work, but also aware of how different sorts of goals, whether those be explicitly embedded within the system or sort of more implicit in terms of biases in the data and things like that, can all sort of govern how those things work and how students can leverage those in order to make decisions and to function in society. So I will end there.
Thanks, Laura. Super interesting. I think Connie mentioned that your screen might have been black at the end, but I don't think we missed anything on your last slide. I think it's okay. We we understood your language. So with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Steph. Who do you have slides to share? Okay, cool.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Awesome. Hi. Let me try to get this on the big screen. Hopefully you can also see my slides now. Great. I'm Steph. I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Washington in Seattle. I've been doing research in the space of AI literacy education since 2016 until now. And I started doing this kind of research because I noticed that young people are now growing up with AI. In 2016, things like Siri, Alexa, voice assistants were just starting to enter kids' homes and kids' lives. We've seen like a rapid expansion of these technologies and the ways in which they're being exposed to young people ever since. So I realized that we're going from the digital natives or a digital generation to an AI generation, where young people will probably learn how to interact with a voice assistant before they even learn how to read and write. And via voice assistant, they can search the web, they can have access to any type of information. So for me, it was important to figure out, like, how do we guide this interaction with AI? How do we make sure that young people and families are not only consumers, but also creators of technologies that are being developed in this space and applications? And more importantly, to make sure that families are being protected from algorithmic bias or all sorts of other issues that are being introduced with these technologies becoming commonplace. So what we know until now is that in general, like when parents are involved in kids' learning and exposure to technology, it has beneficial impact. That family joint media engagement was also something that was studied over the years when they were looking at how kids and parents consume like TV together or interact with mobile apps. Has beneficial impacts in terms of developing and fostering critical conversations in the family. And in my own work and also in the work from other people here in the panel from Duri and others, we've seen that there are many different ways in which we could introduce young people to AI literacies and all the competencies that are part of that. So what I wanted to learn was how could I actually involve not only kids, but also their families in co-designing AI literacy activities? How do kids and parents learn together about AI? And what are all the types of design that we could do to support family literacy? And you heard me use this term a lot, so I wanted to also kind of define like how I'm thinking about it. My mouse also disappeared, so I cannot minimize the video. But for me, AI literacy really include the ability to read, work with, analyze, and author with AI. And they foster critical understanding of this technology. So the critical part is quite important. And what I found throughout the studies I've been doing is that family joint engagement in AI literacies really facilitates access to an evolving language of AI technologies. It also facilitates access to the power and the community this technology can bring. That family joint engagement in AI literacy fosters critical engagement necessary to design social futures that are imagining meaningful uses of AI in the home. And we also discovered that kids and parents like to learn together with AI how to engage in creative coding and imagine like how to basically reimagine computing norms at home and enable much more self-expression, family expression with these technologies. So I've done several studies that were formative, like analyzing the existing AI curricula and see what works and what doesn't, analyzing how AI coding impacts AI understanding, analyzing what are all sorts of different family co-design activities for AI literacy that both parents and kids like to engage in jointly. And last but not least, a longitudinal study looking at how families develop AI literacies over time. And the TLDR, I'm not going to have the time to go into detail for all of these studies. I'll share a link to all the publications, so if you're interested, you can learn more later. Right now, like there are a growing corpus of resources for AI education, AI literacy. We found, together with my co-authors, a corpus of 51 resources that are still active and available online, and we analyze them. These include like activities, demos, curriculum, lots of different types of resources, and we analyze them to really see like to which extent, like what AI concepts they demonstrate, what big ideas for AI literacy they cover, what age groups they're suitable for, and so on and so forth. And what we found actually is that there's really the instructions for how to use this both for families or in a classroom or for educators or informal learning spaces are quite hard to find and use, that there's a sparse coverage of AI concept and primarily ignoring social impact that AI has. That very often for some of these like demos and tools and activities, like there are prohibitive costs or hardware requirements. And there's general lack of consideration of prior knowledge, like what do people know when they're coming to these activities, to this curriculum, to these demos, how could we support them to engage in these activities, and also limited opportunities for self-assessment and reflection. Basically, it's the Wild West, very early stages. There's a lot to do, and there's a lot to, well, opportunities for growth in the space of AI education resources that are available online and recommended for teachers, for example. In the second study I mentioned, where I wanted to try to address some of these issues that I found, I used the platform that I built called Cognimates, which is free, it's open source, it expands Scratch to actually allow kids and their parents to train their custom models with images, with text, with sounds. And once they have their custom models, they can build Scratch-like games. And what we found in this study, we had 57 children, ages 8 to 12, from public, private schools, after-school programs, and we got them to engage in 3 different activities where they could do a text training activity, an image training activity, and a smart home activity. And after they engaged in these activities, what we found is that they became more skeptical of the way they were describing the intelligence of smart assistant they already have in the home, like Alexa or Google Home or smart robots. So it really allowed them to not only develop ways to test like what these technologies can do, but also have realize that this intelligence is not magical. It doesn't come, like from the ether, that it's actually done by people who record the data, who train an algorithm, that there's like people behind these technologies and that there are limitations that come with these technologies. So it allowed them to become much more skeptical of these technologies. So like I mentioned, yeah, I'm close to being
I just want to make sure, oh yeah. No, I just wanted to make sure your slides weren't progressing. I just wanted, maybe if you unshare and reshare, that would help. Sorry to interrupt.
No worries. Let me try again. Are they progressing now?
Okay, we're good. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so the platform is available online. Feel free to try it. It's translated in lots of different languages and it's being used worldwide. So moving forward, I mentioned that we did this longitudinal studies with families at home, especially during COVID, because it was very hard to do this in person. What was interesting there for the long-term study with families, we actually developed lots of different activities around image classification, machine learning, games with voice assistants, design and analyze AI sessions. And what we found here was that parents actually played lots of different roles when engaging in AI literacy activities, learning activities with their kids. The roles range from being a cheerleader to being a mediator, a mentor, a student, a teacher, an observer. And the activities that supported the most, the joint roles where the parents would tinker together with their kids and would collaborate with their kids, were activities that involved like a physical component, like a hands-on component, a crafty component. So for example, like the teachable machine activities worked very well, and the game for like testing the voice assistants, the design activity on paper worked very well. So the takeaway here was really when we're designing or using existing AI resources for family AI literacies, like thinking like how could we support both kids and parents to have discussions around these activities, to build on each other's ideas, to be able to test and tinker with these activities, and not think that because it's AI, everything has to be digital, but actually providing hands-on and crafty ways of engaging with these concepts goes a long way. So that was like a big takeaway from this study. And kind of like moving forward, you know, it was important to see how families of different backgrounds, we had families that spoke several languages, different ethnicities, different parts of the world, different family configuration. For such a diverse range of families from 10 different states in North America, what we found is that they engage in multiple forms of AI literacy, which is why we use this theory in multi-literacy lens. And the way we situate like AI literacies, and not only literacy for a diverse set of families, is like the ability to engage in the following practices: being able to engage in multimodal and embodied situated practices in their home, being able to learn about different AI concepts, being able to engage in a critical framing of AI, and being able to design future meaningful uses. So this approach builds on the theory of multiple literacies from the New London group. And for each of these facets, we have different activities that are also available online that you could try out if you so want to. So to end, I wanted to share some of my current ideas for like what would be cool to do in the space of learning about AI, developing AI literacy for families. And I think it's very important to take an interdisciplinary approach for the curriculum we're creating in this space, to focus much more on social impact, to pick topics that are relevant for both for kids and parents. We know we all lived through COVID, like what can we learn about that and AI at the same time? Climate change is big on youth's minds. How could we use AI to do something about that? And of course, as a form of personal expression, creativity, especially when we've seen everything that is happening in the space of diffusion models, stability AI, DALL-E, like it's like creativity on steroids. It's like really, it's been exploding. So creating a rich collection of projects and lessons that stimulate families in various ways and allow them to engage, and have lots of interactive playgrounds where like both kids and parents could learn by doing. So I took here an example of the spaces, interactive spaces that are on Hugging Face, which is the largest ML
I think we might need
community.
you to unshare and reshare one last time.
Okay. That is annoying. Let me try again. Can you see it now?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so like looking at the spaces from Hugging Face, which is the largest open source community for natural language processing, machine learning, where people build like all of these interactive spaces to play with AI, and thinking like, what would that look like if we have something similar that is customizable demos, that allows for easy integration in curriculum for youth, curriculum for families. And then also thinking about what is this generative AI that is exploding right now now, what does that mean for the future of AI literacy? Like, can we support automatic asset creation and meet kids where they're at, right? Like if they spend a lot of time on Minecraft, like what does it look like to actually automate like assets and worlds in Minecraft and allowing them to do that and customize that? How do we allow them to learn from their own data, right? Like I showed you how on Cognimates, they can train and test their own models. Like I noticed that kids and parents have much more intuition about AI and ML concepts when they work with their own data. Then like, how do we integrate some of these AI libraries, plug-in programming in platforms that are widely successful with kids like Roblox? Again, Hugging Face demos, and yeah, chats are big. Like maybe we could use a smart assistant to teach kids like how to train their own assistant. And there are many things that we could do in this space. So I'm going to stop here because I think I'm at time and we also had the technical challenges, but I'm looking forward to the discussion later and thank you for your attention.
Thanks, Steph. Really interesting stuff. Thanks for sharing. Duri, you ready? You're up next.
Yes, I will share my screen. Just a sec.
And I'm not sure if this slides issue will continue. I'll try to either like wave my hand or put it in the chat if they seem to get stuck again.
Yeah, just let me know. Can you all see my screen?
Yep.
Great. Well, I've really enjoyed the talk so far. Thanks so much for having me today. I obviously didn't come up with the world's most creative title for this talk, but just to give a little context about who I am, I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Communication Studies at Northwestern, and I'm a human-centered AI researcher. So sort of half of my work is focused on designing learning interventions that can help people better understand AI technologies. So like Stefania, I've worked with families and kids, and I'm also interested in looking at other sort of informal learning spaces, like helping people understand AI in the workplaces and elsewhere in their everyday lives. And then the sort of flip side of my research focuses on designing AI that can better understand people. So AI that's better able to engage with us in sort of social creative environments and explain itself to us. But today I'll talk about the AI literacy side of things. So in the spirit of sort of the topic of this session, I wanted to talk today sort of about why I think AI literacy is important, and in particular, in the educational context, why I think AI is sort of different from other types of technologies that we interact with, and why this literacy is necessary. I'm going to talk a little bit about how I define and conceptualize AI literacy. It's a very like emerging field, and so I'm really excited to engage in discussion about sort of what fits in the definition of AI literacy. I think that's very much sort of still forming. And then I'm going to give one example of how I have fostered AI literacy in my own work, just an example of a project that I've worked on. So to dive into it, I'm going to talk first about why I think AI literacy is important. And I think this is important to distinguish because there's a lot of technology that's become integrated into our lives. And even though we use it every day, we usually don't really need to know much about how it works. So I can like screw in a light bulb and I usually don't need to know a lot about electricity except to understand, how not to get shocked. I don't need to, understand in depth how my microwave works in order to use it. And so something I get asked a lot in my work is like, how is AI different from these technologies? It's integrated into our everyday lives. It's showing up in our homes, our workplaces, our schools, and even in a lot of the same contexts as the technologies I showed on the previous slides. It's being used in our TVs. It's being used in our light bulbs. It's being used in our cell phones. So what sets AI apart from these other technologies that are we sort of take for granted and we don't necessarily dig into how they work? And I think, in my opinion, one of the things that really sets AI apart from these other technologies is that it's engaged in active decision-making processes with and for us. in a way that other technologies are not. So AI is deciding, what content to put in front of us when it's selecting what to show on our news feeds, selecting what to display when we type in a search query. It's providing us with recommendations that it decides to show us when we're engaging in entertainment searches and shopping. And in even more consequential domains, it engages in decision-making sort of with and on behalf of us in terms of deciding people to hire, deciding when someone should be released from jail, deciding who is and who is not a criminal. And I think that this really makes AI much sort of more consequential and more important for us to be able to understand, at least at a high level, how it works, so that we can, make critical decisions about where to use it, when it's appropriate to use it. And I think this is sort of exacerbated by the sort of black box nature of the decision-making process, which has been shown in prior work to sort of lead to issues with trusting AI. So we see the input that we put in, we see the, search result that we type into the query, we see the query we type in, we see the results that come back, but we don't always know what's happening in between. And this can lead to issues with trust, people not even recognizing that they're engaging with algorithms, and sort of confusion over why algorithms are making the decisions that they are, confusion over, when it's appropriate to share data. And so for all of these reasons, I think it's really important that we have and foster broader public AI literacy. And I think this is particularly important within an educational context, to draw on the title of the conference, to empower learners to sort of critically engage with when they're sharing their data with AI algorithms, understanding what that data is being used for, making sense of technologies that they might be using to help with their own research and learning processes, and understanding what's put in front of them if it's recommended by an AI system. So I think this is equally as important in an educational context as it is in other contexts. So with that context in mind, I'm going to talk a little bit about how I've defined AI literacy in my own work, and how that sort of informed the work that I've done. I've defined AI literacy in my work as a set of competencies that enables individuals to critically evaluate AI technologies, communicate and collaborate effectively with AI, and use AI as a tool online, at home, and in the workplace. So this is sort of a very practical definition. I'm thinking a lot about how this can be useful to people. And in particular, the framing that I take on AI literacy is focused on things that can be useful to people, even if they don't know how to program AI. So they may not know how to develop or build AI systems, but what are some high-level ideas that they can sort of take away that can help them as they engage with systems in their everyday lives? And I take this focus because I think it lowers the barrier to entry a little bit for people, and also helps to, I think there are useful things that people can understand about AI that do not, even if they may not have an interest in learning how to program or build AI. And so I situate AI literacy sort of in respect to some other literacies that are commonly talked about. I see AI literacy as sort of intersecting with data literacy, especially within the sort of subfield of machine learning, which engages a lot with data. I see other forms of literacy as being able to inform AI literacy. So for example, computational literacy, understanding how to program and using computers to build and create things. I see this as something that can certainly help understanding AI, but it's not necessarily required. But of course, I see understanding how to use and interact with devices as being more required for AI literacy. So this is sort of how I've been conceptualizing this. I'd love to engage in more discussion about other people's thoughts on this. And in my work, I've engaged in a review of literature sort of in the space relating to AI literacy. So looking at literature related to AI education, human AI interaction, computer science education, research on sort of how people perceive and make sense of AI. And from that, I've synthesized a set of competencies and design principles. So the competencies are sort of high-level ideas for people to understand about AI, and the design principles are aimed at researchers, educators, and designers who might be interested in designing AI literacy learning interventions, some sort of principles based in the literature that can facilitate effective learning interventions. And I'm not going to talk about all of these today, but I just want to highlight a couple to give you an idea of what I'm talking about. So one of the AI literacy competencies that I defined based on prior work was the ability to recognize that computers often learn from data, including one's own data. So this is the type of sort of high level idea I'm talking about. And one of the design principles is to consider designing interventions with embodied simulations of algorithms or hands-on physical experimentation with AI technology. I know this is something that both Stefania and I have found in our work, and that has sort of corroborated each other, is that this sort of like tangible embodied nature of AI literacy learning interventions can really help concretize this like abstract concept of AI for learners. And I just want to close with sort of how I've fostered AI literacy in my own work. I'm just going to give one example. For context, this was developed as sort of an at-home activity for families with kids of all ages to interact with. We were focused mostly on like middle school age learners, but we were developing activities for like the whole family to engage with. And in this activity, learners were tasked with creating data sets to teach an AI how to recognize and distinguish birds from non-birds. And they were given a set of cards to create data sets with. So the cards contained creatures. Some of the creatures were birds. Others were things that might be mistaken for birds, such as like a turtle or an alligator or a bat. And each card contained a picture of the creature and then a list of features describing the creature. So things like its habitat, its color, its size. And they were tasked with creating a positive training data set and a negative training data set with like a very limited number of examples. So they placed like 3 cards in the positive training data set, 3 in the negative training data set. And they were supposed to sort of engage in thinking about how to balance even that very small training data set. So thinking about how to represent you know, all birds with just 3 examples. And then they could put weights on different birds to put a little bit more weight on that example if they thought it was more emblematic of being a bird. So if you put like 3 tokens on a sparrow and 1 token on a goose, the algorithm would be trained with 3 sparrows and 1 goose. And then they could take a picture of the board they created, upload it to a website we developed, and see how well their algorithm did at classifying different animals as birds versus non-birds. And they could sort of iterate on this and test out different outcomes and sort of explore how different types of data sets resulted in different outcomes. And this was intended to communicate AI literacy competencies relating to understanding the steps of machine learning, understanding how AI uses knowledge representations to make decisions, and understanding that AI systems learn from data. And it used design principles like contextualizing data, providing opportunities for social and embodied interaction, making AI more explainable, and providing opportunities to like teach or program AI. So that's just one example of how I've done this in my own work, and I look forward to the panel discussion.
Thanks, Duri. That was super interesting. I love the video at the end. We'll just, in the interest of time, just pass it right over to Tyron if you're ready to get going.
Yeah, let me go ahead and share my screen, and hopefully, fingers crossed. All right. So I guess for context, I am been an educator for many years now, and recently stepping away from the classroom. But as I kind of think about digital literacy, I was thinking of it really from this practitioner standpoint. And so even in preparing for this, it was really looking at a lot of the work of various people, but really looking at the work that Duri Long actually did. So kind of what she was just explaining in some of the competencies, I began to kind of dig into that and then think about some of this research of what does this mean from a practitioner standpoint. And it was really around some of these competencies of ethics, in where we have designers that think about some of these ethics pieces, but it's helping students think about the outside world and think about how do we interpret what is the ethics of the people who created this? Should I be questioning how am I engaging with this? when they see something at school, because of the particular space or sphere that they're in that moment, there is an automatic assumption that this is good for me and this is safe and this is okay. And sometimes students bring that over into their home life and to say, if a friend has it or someone shows this to me, some of these things of ethics, it must be okay and it must be good for me. And so as I began to think more about this type of work, I began to think, well, what many of us probably grew up with was this realm of digital literacy, or this term and the stuff of digital literacy, and thinking about, well, what's the culture around this and how should I be safe and what's a practical thing. So for those of you who can remember the days of like AIM and AOL chats and all that good stuff, you would really begin to think that was the initial push for about the safety piece. And so we didn't see anything wrong with it. MySpace was a thing at one point where we just didn't see anything wrong with chatting in certain ways. And then there became this like larger social consciousness around this term digital literacy. So I put the tape there to say, don't forget it. It is really tied and interconnected into this, in understanding what is a part of the culture of the students that we're kind of working with, what is in the culture of families, and what is in the culture of this generation. And so thinking about in the culture of the generation, just in that same vein, we have to think about what is it that we think about as far as risk versus reward, right? This is what is the constant battle, whether that is an educator trying to decide what do they bring into their classroom, district leaders trying to figure those pieces out. But students are also starting to have to think about this. Families are starting to have to think about this big risk versus reward. And so in that vein of both digital literacy and AI literacy, you have to really begin to think about what is it that we're putting in front of each other? What are we putting in front of our families? And so this would be, I'm not sure if anyone has been on social media in the last like 72 to 120 hours, you have probably seen a friend, family member, someone who wanted to morph themselves into these different characters and these different types of avatars to see what their identities would look like. But in that, it seems like it seems fun, it seems entertaining, it seems very now, and everyone is doing it. It's like all the cool kids are doing it. So we all want to try to do this, try out the avatar. Everyone was trying to figure out what is the app. But then I go back to this and I begin to think about some of these components, right? I can't say inherently that the developers are doing something unethical, but I'm not certain. And then I began to think about, well, are they fully transparent in certain things? I then can begin to think about a checklist for myself to say, do I want to engage or do I not engage? And so that is something that youth are constantly having to deal with, and that educators in the classroom are constantly having to deal with, to figure out, we want to be hip, we want students to be engaged, we want it to be relevant to what's going on, but we need a checklist. And I think that's one of the things that hasn't been as crystal clear, because technology has been so rapidly advancing. We haven't had a clear understanding of what are the new checklists that we need to do? What are the new types of questions we need to be asking to ensure that both students and families can make informed decisions about how they engage with AI? At that point, I think I feel like the last big wave of that might have been around having Siri and Alexa and saying, well, they're listening to all our conversations. And that was a big point of contention for some people about how much could they have access to, and how much data is certain apps may take. And so now some people just download apps without even thinking twice about it. But it's that type of checklist that the public needs to think about when we're thinking about what are the known inputs and outputs of, like, what are we actually feeding directly into it, and then what are we immediately getting back, but then also thinking about what are the possible unknown inputs and outputs that should be of what's going to be coming out of this. How is my data going to be used? How do I think about what are some of the ethical pieces of this? And then what are the potential, what is the potential risk and reward for a lot of this? So I'm interested to hear from you all as we kind of talk about this and delve into this a bit more, just to see what people think.
Thanks, Tyron. I really appreciate the perspective from someone who's been in the classroom with middle school, right? In the last 2 years.
Yeah, so I'm pretty sure 7th and 8th graders are right on this wave.
Okay, well, thank you all for these really, really interesting talks. I really appreciate your effort putting them together. I want to go ahead and invite the attendees to go ahead and drop any questions that you have in the Q&A box that you have. But I want to start just kind of following off of Tyron's while other folks maybe have a chance to type in their Q&A. But I think you bring up some really interesting points about how to translate this to teachers in the classroom, especially when you have this, an age group that does have access to a lot of devices and apps that are just sort of readily available. And so I'm curious if any other panelists have any ideas for what that looks like. If you have any recommendations for or what would be like in a perfect world, how would that work for especially, I know, talking about inside the classroom or Stefania, you were talking about like at home, like what are some of the things that people might pay attention to when we're thinking about what are the apps that would promote AI literacy, or what are some of the things that we would want to consider as we are filled with a world full of AI?
Yeah, I just want to say I love the idea of this like checklist of considering, what we should be looking at when we're, or what children should be looking at when they're starting to engage with these technologies. And some of the things that like pop into my mind that would be interesting to have on, such a checklist is, who created the data set, like where, was this data like pulled from, asking what data like they're collecting from you. Those would be some initial things that I think would be valuable to ask about these applications, just off the top of my head.
Yeah, and I'm thinking.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry about that. I was about to say when you were saying that just now, Dr. Long, even just thinking about these pieces of pushing developers about this piece of transparency on actually just having to like blatantly list it out and not bury it in the fine terms of fine print that could be randomly emailed to you at a later time.
I was going to say that my entire lab actually wrote a book about this, which is available online. It's called Critically Conscious Computing. And on each chapter has like teaching units and activities. And on the AI chapter, there's actually a unit on teaching AI critique that actually goes through a series of questions that you can ask about each new application or each new like technology, model, gadget that you might be exposed to, or your friends would introduce to you at home in the classroom or just on the web. So I'll place the links on the chat. That's like an immediate like action item or like response. I think the part that is, I really like that you talked about Lensa and stability AI and generative AI. I think the part that is tricky is that the technology is moving very fast, and it is for most part pretty opaque. It's a black box. So it's kind of a chicken and egg, because you want people to understand more how it works. So they ask for their rights. So they understand like, oh, my data is being scraped without my consent, or like this is actually using artists' work without proper reference, or like you want to understand how the technology works just so you can keep the designers and the companies that create it accountable. At the same time, it's hard to understand how it works when it's constantly evolving, changing, and it's so opaque, right? So my push in this space is to have like more craft with AI. So instead of like, okay, I have DALL-E, I have Lens, I have all of these things, they make super cool images. Maybe like try to look at like, where's the API, where's the SDK, or like, where can I see what's behind, the scenes? Like, how can I, if we had a physical device, we could actually open it and take it apart, right? And we did this activity with kids where we asked them to draw what's inside Alexa, and it's fascinating, right? So kind of like thinking like, how do we break these black boxes, and how do we constantly try to not be swayed away by the hype wave and the compelling examples, but try to understand more like how they work under the hood.
Yeah, I love that. I like the example of asking them to draw it out what's inside.
Yeah.
Laura, I saw you were unmuted.
Oh yeah, I just had a question. It's kind of for Tyron, but it's kind of for everyone. But I was just thinking, I feel like we all kind of talked a lot about teaching how AI works and like how the models works. And I think that's really, really important. But I also think about like what our responsibility is, since we're talking a lot about this within the context of education. I think a lot about, a lot of funding is being poured into educational technologies right now that are teaching, reading or writing or math or science or all these sorts of things. And a big driver of the AI is like automated scoring and adaptivity and personalization of learning. And I think, I guess I don't really know how to form this question exactly, Tyron, but I'm sort of wondering, what's the responsibility in terms of that transparency piece you're talking about of these companies when you say something can score something, if you have people that don't necessarily know how well it's scoring, and they're not going to sit there and read your accuracy rates, for every single model and all the different sorts of things. But, if we're saying, oh, I can score this piece of writing that you have, right, then, and we just put it in your classroom. And I don't know, I was just thinking of that piece and what you think we should do about that.
Yeah, and it's funny, as you were asking that, I'm reading from the question from Priscilla Gonzalez, where she is kind of hitting on this thing of it changing like human interactions and the whole, I guess, the essence of our human lives. Because some of it is with that adaptive AI, I think some of the frustration pieces that naturally happens in learning, that naturally happens in learning, sometimes gets eliminated because students don't have to have some of that collaboration with one another. And I think in the successful integration of AI into spaces, it's making sure that there is that space for collaboration. There is some space for there to even just be a step away from the technology, and it's just pencil and paper with a couple group members to brainstorm some things. And so I think it is trying to strike the balance of understanding, yes, AI and yes, technology is going to be there to assist us with teaching, but there's still socialization that needs to happen in order for students to be able to develop health and be able to be productive in various settings, whether that's within personal or work settings.
All right. If no one else has any follow-up on that, I just want to we have about 4 minutes left, maybe 3, just so we have some time for closing. And we have a question about what AI literacy looks like in university programs that are specifically focused on computer science, and if any of these programs may be missing some of the critical AI literacy skills. Whoever has any thoughts can jump in first.
I guess I'm almost wondering if this is some, like with this question, I guess if someone could probably take it back to say if some of this is the critical thinking, critical reasoning pieces and aspects of it, because I almost wonder in some of those places of what does it mean for some of that critical analysis of things that we often approach to as being very linear, in having just like a kind of on-off switch, or if this is in the realm of thinking about what's missing from computer science programs is some of that, what are the kind of ramifications of what it is that we create. So thinking about both the intended consequences and unintended consequences of the work. And that's why I think that one competency, Duri, you all hit it on the head when you hit the part about the ethics. And I think it's often a part of AI that is often missing, and where we are going to constantly need to circle back to about what are the ethical and moral, where is ethics and morality fall into exposing students to this?
Yeah, I definitely think that ethics is super important to hit on. And I also think that, machine learning and like a lot of the like most current AI technologies are not even necessarily covered in a lot of like core CS curriculum. There's an interesting paper I'll share here on machine learning in the undergraduate curriculum, and sort of a call for a need for that to be incorporated, in a sort of required way in computer science undergraduate courses. And I think part of that is the sort of ethical implications. And also thinking about something I'm personally interested in is sort of like the interdisciplinary potential of a lot of these tools, and how can we create experiences in like the undergraduate curriculum or even in high school curriculums that sort of help span disciplines and engage people in learning about AI in computer science, but also in the arts and humanities where it's relevant.
Yeah, this is super, super interesting. Thanks for sharing. I see a lot of resources in the chat, so hopefully everybody has a chance to mark those down. We're just at the top of the hour, so I just want to, go ahead.
I had a quick add to say that my first reaction to this question was that ethics shouldn't be an add-on on the CS classes. And maybe that's the first question that the CS instruction should start with. I TA'd and taught in AI informatics ethics, and we start with the ethics, like, should we do this? And what are the risks and challenges and implication of starting this project or doing this app? So I think that should be the first entry point, and not an add-on that makes people feel good. And I would say the work that Casey Fissler has done in kind of keeping track of all the classes and good resources for CS ethics would be a great thing to look at.
Thank you. Thank you for that addition. Okay, well, I just want to say thank you again to all of you. This is super fascinating and really some interesting things to think about as we move forward. So thanks again for your time. I know that you all spent time preparing for this, so I really, really appreciate it, and looking forward to more later.